Termo to Madeline, audio edition, page 48. We're reading about the death of Sam Shaw. The two men spoke, and after a few words were exchanged, Shaw invited the sinister character to spend the night with him. The horses were soon turned loose in the Wrangler pasture where the stranger's horse was already grazing. A crackling fire was built in front of the space in the cabin wall where the fireplace was to go. Shaw got a bucket of water from one of the wooden troughs above the house, and soon it and strips of venison on a spit were sizzling over the fire. The two men squatted and peered into the flickering light, but few words were exchanged. After their meager supper had been consumed, Shaw went into the cabin through the fireplace hole with a bucket of hot water and poured some of it into a pan on the floor. Back outside he collected his own and the strangler's plates and knives and went back into the cabin. There he squatted on the floor and proceeded to wash the supper dishes. And there's where the mortal life of Samuel B. Shaw ended. While Shaw's back was to the opening of the wall, the stealthy stranger calmly and deliberately fired a charge of buckshot from a musket at point-blank range into the back of his head. Shaw's body slumped to the floor in a lifeless heap beside the pan of water. The stranger coolly put down the rifle, went to the body, and drug it into the shadows of the far side of the room. Lifting it onto the bed in the corner, carefully he maneuvered all that remained of Sam Shaw until the head hung limply over the bedstead. He reached around to the floor behind him and picked up the case knife that he had just finished eating supper with. Calmly he began cutting into the flesh of Sam's neck as to remove the head. Striking the bones of the neck, he went outside and rummaged through some of Shaw's belongings until he located a carpenter's saw. With saw in hand, he returned to the bed and proceeded to finish the hideous undertaking. Pulling down on poor Sam's head to prevent the coarse tooth saw from binding, he unconcernedly hacked away until it hung lifelessly by the hair in his blood-smeared hand. Back outside again, he quickly rummaged around some more with one hand while he held the ghastly head aloft with the other. Finding an empty bean sack, he carefully placed the lifeless head in it. Then, almost at an afterthought, he went back inside and removed the boots and outer clothing from the body. These he dropped in a pile on the floor. Then, with all the care and diligence, he maneuvered the headless form under the bed covers and tucked in the corners around the shoulders, as if it was a gesture of good will toward the man he had just murdered so shockingly. Taking the bean sack with the grisly contents in hand, he picked up the musket and slipped quietly into the dark, overcast night. He cotton-saddled his horse, mounted the animal, and headed north. The lone horse and rider eased quietly into the standing water on the flat just below the marsh fence line and splashed along noisily until reaching high ground on the east side a couple of miles away. There the rider nudged his mount into a trot and headed toward Tule Lake. By the time this ghostly figure and his horse reached West Valley, it was raining steadily and had been for some time. Coming to a long rock fence just above the valley floor, the shadowy figure dismounted. He found a suitable crevice between the lava rocks of the fence and stuffed in the soggy, rain-soaked bean sack and rolled a couple of rocks on top of it. Quietly remounting, he disappeared into the remaining hours of the night. Far behind, on the flooded Madeline plains, the storm had forever obliterated any traces or tracks. The rains continued off and on for the next 2 weeks. Traffic was not moving much on any of the boggy roads of the plains, and no one chanced by the scene of the murder until the 15th of October. On that particular Monday, the group of Indians camped below the Shaw place disbanded, most of them heading north toward South Fork Valley. While one group was moving along close to the forlorn little cabin, a squaw called Sally walked over and peered through the fireplace hole on the wall. The sight that greeted her there was enough to curdle the blood of the strongest individual, white or Indian. She ran back to the group and excitedly told them what she had seen. A few of the more strong-stomached of the group went up to the cabin to see for themselves. The entire band took to flight at the speed of a wounded coyote. Sally's buck rode on ahead and made the facts known of the whites at the marsh place. Word of the horrendous killing began to spread like wildfire. The story was first heard by law authorities in Beaver and shortly afterward in Susanville. Justice Roney and a small posse of men left Big Valley on the double, picking up other interested parties along the way. Justice Blake and District Attorney Shin were dispatched to the scene from Susanville. The Beaver party arrived first and surveyed the situation. The handsaw was leaning against the wall of the cabin. The rains had washed the side that was away from the wall clean, but the side against the building was covered with blackened, clotted blood. Inside, the headless body showed signs of having been dead for some time. From the way it was laying, it appeared that the man had been killed while sleeping. Although the rains had washed away the evidence of what happened, there was a large blood stain on the floor at the bedstead. There were also darkened stains of spots on the floor where the blood had fallen, leaving an obvious trail to the hole in the wall. But outside, all the traces of where the head had been carried vanished. In their diligent search for the missing head, which covered every inch of the surrounding area, the Big Valley posse came across a wagon load of poles on the hill. There on the wagon was a large blood stain where Shaw had dressed the deer, leading them to believe he had been murdered in the woods and hauled back to the house. This theory was dispelled, however, when Shin and Blake arrived from Susanville. They located a few pieces of shot that were embedded in the floor and the wall of the cabin. After more searching and a lot of discussion, a grave was quickly scooped out of the muddy hillside. Most of the remains of poor old Sam Shaw were finally given a proper burial. A coroner's jury was formed from among the men of the Big Valley party. They hastily rode up and swore out a statement for Shin to take back to the county seat at Susanville, which wrote, quote, "We, the undersigned jury, summon to the inquiry the cause of the death of a man found in a cabin on Madeline Plains. We find that the deceased was of the name of S.B. Shaw, formerly of Deer Creek, Tehama County, California, and that he came to his death at the hands of parties unknown. We would also suggest that the matter be further investigated by the proper authorities. W.R. Schuler, S.C. Dibley, T.F. Cummings, B. Bath, Manuel Lucas." Unquote. The law enforcement authorities of both Lassen and Modoc counties took the suggestion of the coroner's jury to heart. A fanatic search was started that was to last for months in an attempt to find any and all clues as to why, how, and who did the crime. But the whole affair continued to remain shrouded in a deep mystery. The jury's findings in the matter was to remain in effect. Sam Shaw had simply, quote, "come to his death at the hands of parties unknown." Unquote. Next chapter. Establishment of the Williams Ranch. Even though Jim Looper had been released of lack of evidence in the slaying of Sam Shaw, rumors continued to circulate about him, connecting him in one way or another with the murder. A little over a year later, shortly after he sold his last title to the Marsh Place to George Bailey in September of 1884, he left Tule Lake permanently. He went back to his home state of Arkansas, but after another year he came back to Smoke Creek and went back to work for Theodore Winters. But he never again held a position of prominence with Winters as he had before he let the Marsh Place go to George Bailey. Bailey was obvious in cahoots with George H. Williams because he only kept the place for 5 months after getting the final deed to it. On February 20th, 1885, he sold the whole place, lock, stock, and fence lines, to Williams for $2,000, exactly $1,000 more than he had given for it. With the property that he already had adjoining the Marsh place, this gave Williams 640 acres. John and Mona Williams and their family were already living on the place. The only change that made in the moving their camp from the original Williams property over to the Marsh place house. Even though the entire place was owned by his father, John ran it and operated it as an independent setup. As his sons grew, he turned it all over to them to take care of while he pursued his many and diversified surveying jobs. It was only a matter of a few years before Roy and Harvey were running the place all on their own. The ranch stayed in George E. Williams' name, however, until his death in 1898. It was not until July 3, 1902, that the final paperwork was completed and the entire estate turned over to John Williams for $3,000. But by then, it had 1,363 acres. The additional lands had been bought by George E. Williams and homesteaded by John and Mona and Harvey Williams. Long before that, however, it had become known as the Williams place. The Marsh place had slowly slipped out of the local people's vocabulary. Next chapter, titled Holden Dick, Capture and Trial of a Renegade. Captain Dick was an outstanding among the Pit River Indians. Although he spoke no English, he had been instrumental in making peace and maintaining peace with the white men who had entered the South Fork Valley from the beginning. He was a quiet, humble individual of deep understanding. Captain Dick's squaw was either a sister or half-sister, the record is unclear, to another Indian named Dick. Holden Dick, on Dick Holden. Holden Dick took his name from Thomas and Josephine Holden, who were early pioneers to Northern California. They had lived first in Lassen County, moving to South Fork in 1867. Dick had worked for them and lived with them, and had first been referred to as Holden's Dick, to distinguish him from all the other Pit River Indians called Dick. Now, Holden Dick was the exact opposite of his brother-in-law, Captain Dick. He was flashy and cocky and boisterous. He took a liking to bright-colored white man's clothing. He especially liked to wear the large hat of the buckaroo. A large, bright-colored feather stuck in the hat band was Holden Dick's trademark. However, in spite of all his flashiness, of which boozing was a part, Holden Dick was completely trusted by the white men. In the early 80s, he and his wife, Emma, both worked for South Fork rancher Charles Williams, brother of John Williams of Tule Lake. When Charlie had to be gone, he felt his wife and child were perfectly safe with Dick and Emma. That all changed rather suddenly in the first days of February 1885, upon the death of Captain Dick's wife. She evidently had been carrying a heavy load on her conscience, because on her dying bed she asked to urgently speak with a white chief. Authorities were summoned, and were soon hearing a hair-raising story that impacted 3 Indians, Holden Dick, Charlie Fox, and Billy, in the death of Sam Shaw on the Madeline Plains. The next day, Thursday, February 12th, 1885, Chris Ratchford, sheriff of Modoc County, was notified. He wasted no time in saddling his horse with a small posse of men, rode over to Charlie Williams' place at South Fork. There he arrested Holden Dick and escorted him in chains back to the jail in Alturas. Charlie Fox was picked up the same day, and on the following morning, John Blake, Justice of the Peace of Aden, rode with Billy. All 3 suspects were locked up to await transfer to Susanville for the trial on the Supreme Court in the county where the crime had been committed. The transfer was not to take place for more than a week, however. In the process of questioning the suspects, the story of the murder began to unfold, and there was evidence to be collected. Charlie Fox and Billy soon began to emerge as poor suspects, although Charlie had heard some of the story through the grapevine. Emma supplied the first break in the case. After Dick had been hauled away, and she was questioned alone, she told a story of an early morning conversation she had with her husband over a year before. Dick had been out all night and came in drunk early in the morning. When Emma had questioned him about where he had been, he told her he had killed one man that day, and if she didn't shut up, he might kill her too. When Dick was confronted with this, and the other condemning evidence supplied by Captain Dick's wife and Charlie Fox, he finally broke down and confessed the whole matter. He blamed the whole affair onto a white man, one A.B. Perry. And this here's where we'll continue in the next video.